Welcome to Old Classic Car, and in this collection we are looking at ULEZ compliant classic cars, i.e. older cars that you can drive around London in the ULEZ or Ultra Low Emission Zone without problem, without fine. And to begin with, we have a classic Mini. Of course there was going to be a Mini in here somewhere. This is a Mark 1 Austin Mini of the very early 1960s, but very manoeuvrable, cheap to run, and of course, being 40 years old or over, it's tax exempt as well as ULEZ exempt, so perfect for the London low emission zone and possibly low emission zones in other towns and cities, but it does vary a little bit, the regulations. Okay, car number 2 is this right-hand drive version of the Renault 4CV. In this country it was the Renault 750. Again, very manoeuvrable, cheap to run, ideal for parking, nice and small, perfect for inner city driving, I would have thought. Okay, now of course not all cars that live and drive in the ULEZ zone actually come from that area. Sometimes you want to travel further afield or travel in from non-ULEZ areas, so you want a fun car as well. And how about this Triumph TR3A? I haven't included the earlier TRs because they have inner door handles, but that's a lot more practical with the door handles on the outside. Okay, a slice of 1970s now, and a Vauxhall Chevette hatchback. Again, that's just a perfect little car to drive around London, I would have thought, in the low emission zone. Over 40 years old, so it qualifies as exempt from the ULEZ. I've included cars that are small to medium size here. We've got a short wheelbase Land Rover, although arguably perhaps the long wheelbase Land Rover is even more practical than this one. This is a Series 3 from the early 1970s. But yeah, all the cars here are historic classification, ULEZ exempt, tax exempt, small to medium in size, and reasonable spare support. Now, there aren't too many pre-war cars that I'd think would be a good sort of regular user in and around London, but the Morris 8 probably is one of them. These are very well supported with parts, quite small, quite easy to park, and you can get 4 or 2-door versions as well as a Tourer. This one was down at the Bewley Museum. We saw this in 2022. Okay, now 1950s cars that would be ideal for ambling around London, and I would have thought a 4-door Austin Cambridge, one of the pre-Farina Austin A55 Cambridges. This is a 2-tone car. What a great little car that is. 1500cc B-Series engine, so quite economical. The parts are still around for them, as is the case for these as well, the 3-wheel Reliance. You've got vans, you've got little estates and so on. But yeah, that'd be a very cheap economical car to drive around London, I would have thought. Again, the criteria for this particular video includes the car has to be manoeuvrable, fairly easy to park, spares aren't too bad to get hold of, and here we have a Ford Consul Classic, a 2-door classic. You don't see too many of these around, and arguably the spare situation body-wise is probably pretty tricky for these, but running gear-wise, to keep a good car on the road, it probably shouldn't be too much of a problem to run one of these. Now in Porto we saw this driving around, and what a practical classic that is. A Saab 99 Combi Coupe, the hatchback version of the Saab 99. You can fit so much in the back of one of those, and they're quite a cool car now, I think. You don't see too many of them around, but there are still spares out there if you go hunting. Now here's a bit of a left field choice. You don't see too many of these around now, but buy a good one and it should be quite reliable, I would have thought. The Triumph Acclaim. I think they were all 4-door cars, but if you need a 4-door saloon and you want something that's still quite easy to drive, I mean, this is a 1981 car, so it just about sneaks into the ULEZ exempt status now. Whereas well inside, of course, is this 1950s Hillman Minx. This is a convertible, as you can see, quite a rare car, but a convertible or a saloon Hillman Minx would be a great everyday driver in London, I would have thought. Again, body parts not so easy to find, but running gear you should still be okay. And how about this, if you only need a 2-seater, and how about an MGB Roadster? A ULEZ compliant city car, doesn't have to be dull. And look at this bright yellow car here. This was at the Malvern Classic Car Show in 2022. But yeah, MGBs, you can get virtually every part for them. There's so much knowledge and advice out there. That'd be a great user. But if you need more space, like I said, back to 4-door saloons. This is a 5 Series BMW. It's on a Y plate, so about 1982 or early 83. So again, just about sneaks in to historic taxation class, 40 years or over. And of course, being tax exempt, and it will become MOT exempt as well. But obviously, if you're running one of these cars regularly, you probably do want to get it checked over every now and again. Now in France, we spotted this, a lovely Peugeot 403, a left-hand drive car. And if you're driving in cities, left-hand drive isn't as much of an issue as maybe as it could be out on the open road. what a great characterful old car that would be. And how about this? A 1966 Ford Cortina Mark 1. You can get 2-door or 4-door saloons, and there are estates as well. Now, I do like an old estate. But yeah, practical car, very airy. Nice big windows, square cut bodywork design, so nice and easy to park and position on the road. So ideal again for inner city traffic, I would have thought. Now these little 600s are looking a little bit past their best. Fiat 600s, or probably in this case Seats, the Spanish built version of the Fiat 600s. But yeah, whether these are still around or not, this was quite a few years ago I took this photograph. But again, another example of a really good classic inner city car. Here we go, back to 4-door saloons again. We've got a galaxy of Farinas there, and in the foreground a Riley, probably a 468. The later ones were the 472, so this could be either of them. But yeah, B-series engine, comfortable, leather seat, nice wooden dashboard. What a great way to sit in a traffic jam. And here is a slightly older British 4-door saloon, of course the Mark II Ford Consul. And a collection of photographs I compiled that were taken in the early 1980s. There was a lovely Mark II Consul, a yellow one, photographed in London, and it would still be a great car to drive around London in today, I would have thought. Wonderful. Well, how about this? A rival to the Ford Zephyr and the Consuls back in the day, the F-Type Vauxhall Victor. Spares aren't quite so easy to find body-wise, so you wouldn't want to be running a poor one, or buy one that's incomplete, but get a good one to start with. The running gear parts, the oily bits, are probably quite easy to service still. How about this? A Simca 1000. You don't see these too often, but it's a very small car, but it's 4 doors. So if you need a small 4-door saloon, maybe one of these would suit, especially if you like holidaying in France, looking around French scrapyards and buying up parts while you're at it. What a great little car that is. And again, manoeuvrable, nice and boxy, so easy to park. Same with this, the Hillman Imp. If you're keen on a small British car, but you don't really fancy a Mini, then maybe a Hillman Imp would be a good choice, but just get one that's in good condition. It's a rear engine car, and they did suffer a little bit with the reliability back in the day, so buy a good one, look after it, and you probably won't go too far wrong. Okay, back to BMC, and we've got an Austin Healey Sprite Mark 1. Great little cars these, 948cc twin carburetor cars, quite nippy. It might be a little bit daunting parking one of these in a queue of traffic next to a huge double-decker or a big lorry, because it's quite a low little car, but yeah, very manoeuvrable and easy to park. Okay, bit of German classic car engineering now, of course, the VW Beetle. Now, continuing this look at cars that comply with the Ultra Low Emission Zone in London, we've got this, a 1950s MG Magnette. What a stylish 4-door saloon that is, of the 1950s. Great car, BMC B-Series engine, 1489cc. You could also shoehorn an overdrive gearbox from an MGB into that. That'll make it very usable. Okay, another pre-war car, which would actually make quite a good little run around, as long as you probably weren't going too far. The Austin 7 Ruby, great spares availability, loads of people run these, and yeah, nice and easy to run. How about one of these, an Austin Maxi? You might think, oh, not one of those, but people ran these every day back in the 1970s and 1980s, and there's no reason why you couldn't run a good one today. This is quite a late example on the V-plate, so what's that, late 1979 or early 1980 or thereabouts, but it qualifies as historic classification now, as does this 292 XUN, a 1956 Vauxhall E-Series, a Wyvern. So that's the 4-cylinder car. The Cresta and the Velox had the 6-cylinder engine, but that shouldn't be too bad on fuel. And great looking car, very stylish way to drive around London, I would have thought. How about one of these, the boxy Mark II Ford Escort. This is a 4-door saloon, a Gear, the 1.6 Gear, so it's a posh one, a few extra trimmings and a vinyl roof and jazzy paint. But yeah, that'd be a nice easy car to park as well. The beauty of these older cars is you can see out of them, so parking and yeah, makes life a whole lot easier. Now this is a stylish car. We've had Wyverns already and a rival, but this is a 6-cylinder car. This is the Austin Westminster XNX 400, a lovely 2-tone car, beautiful car, comfortable, quiet, with a decent bit of grunt if you have to venture onto the M25 every now and again. Now the Triumph Herald is probably one of the most practical classics of all, I would have thought, and the Estate even more. Just look how much window space you've got there. So easy to park, reverse. These were popular with driving schools in the 1960s. Great turning circle as well, just like a London taxi. And nice and easy to work on with that lift up front. Okay, a bit of Gallic charm here. We've got an early 1970s Renault 5 in a very vibrant colour of orange. You'll certainly stand out on the roads of London if you drive around in one of these. But yeah, very neat little car and a good excuse to go to France looking for spares. How about this? Not maybe the most practical of cars, but it's tax exempt, ULEZ exempt, the Volvo P1800 ES. At least with that estate car styling, you could fit a fair bit of shopping in the back of that one. So yeah, that's quite a left field choice really for this particular collection, but I thought I would include it anyway because they are great. As is this, an Austin A40 Farina. I ran our Mark 1 for quite a few years, a very practical car, especially if you get the Countryman with the lift up rear window as well as the drop down rear boot lid. That makes for a very handy car, dead easy to run, 948cc A-series engine, spares are everywhere. So yeah, another good choice. How about this though, DAF 44. CVT transmission, of course, so nice and easy and stop-start traffic. Tax exempt, ULEZ exempt, and shouldn't be too bad to insure either. So yeah, nice choice that, but just again, it's the sort of car you wouldn't want to buy a ropey one and try and bring it up to scratch if you're using it on a regular basis. Now here's a sensible choice from the 1970s, the VW Golf Mark 1. Many of the cars you see are GTIs, but there are still quite a few less performance-oriented versions out there. And one of those would make a very, very practical car indeed, I would have thought. Here's a car we saw in daily use not so long ago, parked up in the supermarket car park, the Morris Minor. Again, this would be such a practical car to run on a daily basis, I would have thought. And so many spares available, nice and cheap to run. Nice view out as well, looks great. What more could you ask for in a practical classic like that? And here we've got an Austin Allegro, a 4-door Austin Allegro. Of course, you could get 2 doors as well. But for this particular collection, I think a 4-door is the more practical choice. It qualifies as historic, it's in the small to medium-sized car band, spares are available, it's manoeuvrable and quite easy to park, and it can be reliable, but just have to maintain it. And this is ideal if you like your minis, but just with a little more comfort and a little more boot space. Then how about this, the Wolseley Hornet. This is a 1966 example spotted on a classic car run just a few years ago. Here's a really good load lugger, a Hellman Avenger Estate. You don't see too many of these around. I like the furry dice in this particular one. This was photographed down at Slape, and there's my old Morris Minor in the background. That's a Moggy that I used to run as my regular user classic, a 1952 car. And again, Morris Minor's very, very good choice. And how about this, if you need a little bit more space, still with 4 doors, a Mark III Ford Zephyr. This is the Zephyr 4 with a 4-cylinder engine that might make it a little bit more economical than the 6-cylinder cars. Yeah, ideal, perfect car if you have to do some longer trips as well as driving in and around London. Same with this. This is the Triumph 2000, of course, and this is a Mark 1 from late 1969 or early 1970. Lovely smooth 6-cylinder engine there, overdrive gearbox as well, or an automatic, so if you need an automatic classic car, maybe this should be on the shortlist. Still quite a lot of parts around, but they do go rusty. Here we go with a rear-engined Skoda now. This is on a B plate, so it's about 1984, so it's not quite there yet with historic classification, but I'm sure there are slightly earlier examples around which have fallen into the historic 40-plus-year-old age classification by now. And this was at an evening classic car meet, a Humber, a beautifully original Humber Hawk 4-door saloon. These are available as 4 doors or estates, and either would be super practical. Perhaps not the most economical of cars that will feature in this particular video, but a great choice if you like smoking around in something really big and comfy. Now here's the ideal city car. It was ideal for the job 40 years ago, and it's just as ideal now, the Austin Mini Metro. Great little cars these are. Great visibility, nice simple A-series running gear. Parts are pretty available as well by all accounts. So yeah, great cars. And this is the Metro's distant grandfather, I suppose, if you like, the Austin A30. This car introduced the A-series engine to the world 803cc at the time. No ball of fire, but very tunable. You could always fit some later parts off an A35 or A40 to it, or Frog Eye Sprite. So yeah, plenty of options there. And this, the W123 series Mercedes. These were introduced in the 1970s, so fall into the correct classification now for being ULEZ exempt, and that would be a very comfortable and very well built car as well. Parts aren't cheap for these, but parts availability is good. And it's the same story with these, the Volvo Amazon, the 120 series. This is a 4-door saloon, you could get 2 doors as well, and the estates. This car dates to 1966, parts still very available. For a long time Volvo was still making new wings and everything for them. I'm not sure if that's the case now, but yeah, these are really good comfy cars. I used to run those quite regularly. Okay, well, next up, a ULEZ compliant car from the 1950s, a Hillman Minx. Now, the early 50s Minxes were side valve powered, and the later ones had the overhead valve engine, so I'm thinking that's probably the one to go for. But they do have column gear change, so just be wary of that if you're thinking, if you've got one of these on your shortlist, because not everyone likes a column gear shift. Okay, this was in Portugal. This is a slightly tired looking example of the Renault 4. Now, I'd welcome any comments from anyone who's run one of these before, because I do quite like these as an alternative to the 2CV, and I could certainly see myself with one of these in the future. But are they okay? What are they like to run and own? If you know, please let me know in the comments. Same with all the cars here. Now we've got a slice of 70s wedginess with the Triumph TR7. This is actually a sprint version, one of the very few cars fitted with a 16 valve engine. Most of them aren't like that. But if you only need a 2-seater and you're after something a bit distinctive and a bit unusual, maybe a Triumph TR7 would fit the bill. Or one of these from the rival MG, also of the 1970s. This is a 77 car, the MG Midget 1500. Again, a 2-seater, bit tight to get in if you're quite lofty, but yeah, very usable car, very drivable, and again, easy to park and easy to look after. Now, another Renault, another rear engine car, but this is the Renault Dauphine. How about one of these? Again, parts you might have to go looking across the channel for spare parts on a regular basis, but with the internet and everything, it makes life a whole lot easier to own these slightly left field cars. Our own 4CV is equally well supported, but not so much here. Okay, back to British Leyland, the joys of British Leyland in the late 1970s, and here we've got the Leyland Princess. I'm not quite sure why, but I do quite like these. I'm not quite sure what it is about them. The later Ambassador does have a hatchback though, unlike the Princess. But yeah. Now, how about one of these? This is a car. I ran one of these for a little while, a few years ago, and it was so practical. This is a standard 10 based standard companion, a 4-door estate, a small 4-door estate, and they're not exactly thick on the ground. You don't see too many of these for sale, but if you do see one, grab it because they drive really nicely. Okay, back to Dagenham and Fords, and we have a Ford Escort here, circa 1981, 4-door, or rather 5-door hatchback. You could get the 3 doors as well, and the estates, but yeah, nice, simple, fairly painless car to run, I would have thought, and a bit different to all those modern cars that you see in London usually. And how about this, a Fiat 126, a nice, really small car, so if you're very tight for parking, and you drive into places where there aren't much room for parking, maybe something like this would be a good choice. A bit newer than the Fiat 500, a bit easier to drive and easier to see out of, so that might be a good choice. How about one of these, a little 2-door Vauxhall Viva HA from the mid-1960s. This is a 1966, complete with full-length sunroof. And again, this is one of those cars, again, where you wouldn't want to buy a rough one if body parts probably aren't too easy to find for these, but running gear I would have thought would be pretty well served for these particular cars. Same with this, the Ford Cortina Mark III of the early 1970s, about 1971. This is a 4-door car, and how usable would that be if you need to carry 4 or 5 people around and you're after something that is ULEZ exempt and you can drive it around without being paid having to pay £12.50 a day, and maybe that's a good choice. And how about this? How swish is this? I do think these are stylish. The Vauxhall Victor FB Estate. What a great looking car that is. It's just a shame most of them have rusted away and been scrapped by now. But if you find one of these for sale, that's a nice alternative to perhaps the Ford Cortina Estate or something like that. Now this is a boxy old friend. I had one of these, the Volvo 140 series. This is a 2-door car, which I don't think technically was actually sold here. I think they're all 144 saloons or 145 estates, and the little red badge on the wing there says that this is a twin carburetted S version, so that should bob along quite well, and you can have overdrive gearboxes in them too. Okay, 691 UYO, another little micro car, perfect for short hops if not so much long distance driving. This is a Vespa 400 dating to 1958. This was at the Capestone Classic Car Show not long ago. How much fun that would be to drive around in. That looks great. Bit more space, bit more spare support here in the UK at least. We've got a Morris Marina. What do we think about Morris Marinas? They don't have the best reputation in the world, but again, it's one of those cars that if you keep on top of it, plenty of preventative maintenance, keep it well greased and so on, it should prove to be fairly reliable, I would have thought. This is nice, a Singer Vogue. This is a latest one with this squarer roof line. Makes it a lot easier to see out of compared to the cars with the wraparound screens. But here, just look through that, how big the glass area is, how easy that is to park with those squared off front and rear wings. That'd be a doddle to drive, I would have thought. Down to Bewley, and we have a Mark I Ford Consul. Arguably the Mark II cars are probably a little bit easier to own on a day-to-day basis, but you can easily run one of these, I would have thought. Buy a decent one, look after it, get to know how to maintain it and service it and so on. Keep on top of that, and there's no reason why this can be perfectly reliable. Now here we have an early Wolseley 1500. There is a later example later on in this collection. This is a lovely little two-tone car. VSY 909 at the Malvern Classic Car Show in 2022. But yeah, 4 doors, nice 1500cc engine, so it will drive along quite nicely, keep up with modern traffic, and a great choice. Now, an Allegro again. We had the Allegro Saloon, a 4-door saloon before, and this is the Estate, which I always thought was actually quite a good looking car, especially from the back. Not just a saloon with a bit tacked on, it was actually designed properly as an estate car. You can't level that to everything. There's a Sinclair C5 as well in the back. Okay, back to French cars, and we have the Citroën Acadian, the van version, if you like, of the Citroën Diane, contemporary of the Citroën Diane. And how practical would that be? I mean, being a van, they're not always that easy to reverse. That's the only thing to remember with old vans. But if you've got a van with windows, it makes life a lot easier. Or we have this, an ex-registered Reliant kitten, the 4-wheel Reliant kitten. Fiberglass bodywork, so nothing to rust apart from the chassis underneath. But yeah, again, look after it, and that would be a great little car to drive in and around cities, I would have thought. You don't see too many of these around. We've had an Avenger Estate, but even the Avenger Saloon would be quite a good choice. This is quite an early one actually, late 69 or early 1970. The 4-door saloon. Parts, mechanical parts you should be able to get away with. Body parts I would have thought would be quite hard to find, but there's no reason why you couldn't run a good one. And this is one of the overlooked Fords of the 1960s. This is a Ford Corsair. You could get 2 or 4-door saloons. Again, let me know what these are like to actually own. Somewhat overshadowed by the Cortinas and the Lotus Cortina in particular, but the Corsair is a good choice in its own right, I would have thought. And the Triumph Dolomite. What do we think about Triumph Dolomites? There are so many different versions to choose from. You've also got front-wheel drive cars, 1300s, 1500s, Dolomites, Dolomite Sprints. There wasn't an estate version, and they were all 4-door saloons pretty much. Although there was a 2-door, actually you could buy a 2-door as well, but not so many of those around now. Now this is quite swish, not just any Super Minx, but a 2-door Hillman Super Minx convertible. You'd certainly cut quite a dash down the King's Road in that one, I would have thought. Okay, carry on with this collection of cars that would qualify for driving around in ULEZ London without paying a daily fee. Is this a Citroën Diane? We've just had the Acadian and referred to the Diane, and this is an example of one. This looks like a regular user somewhere in Portugal. This was possibly Coimbra, but yeah, that was a few years back. Hopefully it's still on the road. Now, as I've said before, the Herald is one of the most practical cars you could possibly own. Certainly with town driving in mind, and if you need a little more grunt, then the Vitesse is the one to have, with either a 1600 or, as in this case, the 2-litre straight 6 engine under its bonnet. Look how easy it is to work on that engine. Everything is so accessible. That's probably not something you could level at this, but what a cute little car, the Panhard Dyna X. A really oddball little French car, but again, should be quite economical. You might have to do your homework on how to look after it and where to find the parts, but I'm sure the parts are out there somewhere. And once you get your head around it, that would be a great little car to drive around in. And how about this? Not just a Hillman Minx. If that's just a little bit plain for you, then this, the Sunbeam Rapier, the two-door pillarless coupe version of the Hillman Minx. What a great car that is, and they can be tuned up to go quite well indeed. The later cars with a 1725cc engine, overdrive gearbox and so on, very, very usable. And back to BMC Farinas, we had that Riley earlier on, and this of course is a Morris Oxford, quite a late example, about 1970 or thereabouts, but nice leather seats, plenty of room for 4 or 5 people, comfy, great car. There were even a few diesel versions of these built, but fortunately I don't think there are too many of those left. Okay, now micro cars and bubble cars were designed very much with city living and driving in mind. This is the BMW iZeta, and yeah, well, if there's only one or maybe two of you at a push, what car would be better than that for driving around in an inner city, I wonder. And on a similar theme, but one of our own homegrown efforts, this is an early Mark I Reliant Regal on display down at Bewley. If you haven't seen a video yet that we did walking around the many exhibits at the Bewley Museum, please check that out when you're finished here. But yeah, a whole lineup of very practical inner city cars there. Plenty of space, great visibility. The Hillman Minx, the Arrow series car, and of course you have the Hillman Hunter and Sunbeam derivatives as well. But yeah, don't see too many of these around, so you wouldn't want to buy one that needed loads of body panels and bodywork and interior, but buy a good one to start with, look after it, and you won't go far wrong. Now how about this? Quite a stylish car, I always thought these were, but you don't see them too often now. The Peugeot 504. Or maybe a Rover P4. This is the Rover 90 of the late 1950s, mid to late 1950s, but that would be a great car. Wooden dashboard, lovely leather seats, very regal driving position, quiet. What a great choice that would be. Of course, ULEZ, historic cars are exempt from ULEZ. Other low emission zones around the country may be different, so you will need to check on that. Now here we've got an Austin A35 van with added rear windows. As I said before, vans can be quite difficult to park and manoeuvre, especially in tight spaces, so I'd avoid a van unless it's got added windows like this one has, which makes it a lot more usable. Now one of the few pre-war cars to feature in this video is this, a Ford Model A. This is a 4-door saloon, and it's one of the most practical pre-war cars you can possibly hope to run. Really good spares availability, simple engine, 3.3 litre side valve 4-cylinder engine, really nice car to run. And of course Morris Minors, they're never far away from your thoughts if you're thinking about a practical classic, and this is the Traveller that Dad owned until not that long ago. Really practical, but just make sure that wood's in good condition, and if the car's living outside you really will need to keep on top of the woodwork because it is structural. Another Hillman Super Minx here. We've had a convertible already, and this is the more regular 4-door saloon. This is the later one with the squared off roofline, and the early cars had the wraparound window, but visibility out of these later examples is just a little bit better. That's a 1965 car. Another DAF, this time the fastback. This is the DAF 55 Coupe, again with CVT transmission. And a bit of an oddball choice, but yeah, once you sort of get your head around how it all works, I think that would be quite good fun to bomb around London in. Down to the NEC Classic Car Show, and another classic Fiat. We've just had a Fiat 126, but how about one of these, the Fiat Panda? These have got quite the following now, especially the 4-wheel drive version, so it might be worth looking out for one of those. Some of these will now fall within the historic taxation class. This one's a little bit later, but have a good look and you should be able to find one about 1980 or thereabouts. Okay, another Triumph Herald. This is a 1200 on a D plate, so 1966, and of course it's the convertible version, so you'd certainly cut quite a dash driving around a low emission zone area in one of these. The Saab 95, the Estate, the V4 powered Estate. What a practical car that is. Of course, people might argue that these put out more pollution perhaps than a brand new car, but let's not forget that the pollution involved with producing these cars is long gone for these old cars, which isn't something you can say for cars that are built and shipped over from all 4 corners of the globe. Okay, SLX 202, a Sunbeam Talbot 90. We spotted this one down at Prescott, and beautiful quality car, lovely interiors in these. Really nice choice. If you want something a little bit different to the norm, when it comes to classic cars that are ULEZ compliant, maybe this is the one for you. And here we have another example of the 1500cc Wolseley 1500. This is a slightly lighter car than the one that we showed before down at Malvern. This was outside a local auction centre a few years ago now on a very snowy day, but again a very usable car. Under the skin, very similar running gear to the Morris Minor. Over in Portugal we spotted this Lotus Elan Sprint, and even at the time it struck me that that would be a great little car for city driving. Nice and small, nimble, agile, easy to park, great spares availability, and a lot of fun as well if you decide to venture beyond the remit of the ULEZ zone. Minis again are really practical cars, of course, the Estate in particular, and the Clubman Estate even more so. That slightly longer, squarer front end did offer a little bit better engine accessibility compared to the traditionally styled Minis, so perhaps that would be a good choice if you're thinking of driving a car in towns on a regular basis. This is a bit of an oddball choice, I must admit, but Hondas are usually quite reliable cars, so this early Honda Prelude has certainly got that in its favour. It's an 82 car, this one, so it just about qualifies as being over 40 years old at the time of recording this video. And you might struggle to find one, but find a good one and I'm sure it'll be quite reliable. Here, next up, the Morris Oxford MO, the side valve powered Morris Oxford MO. It looks a bit like a Morris Minor, but the first giveaway is those rounded off door tops. The door frames there curved. On the Morris Minor those are squared off, so that's the first giveaway, and it's a much bigger car than the Minor. Okay, back to French cars, and we've got a 1970s example of the Citroën Amy 8, the Amy Super, as it says on the front wing there. Very practical car, nice big estate, tall roof, great to see out of, great to position, great to park. So, yep, that one gets the thumbs up from me. Or how about this, back to 1950s traditional British car motoring, PWM 432, the Ford 100E Anglia. Parts availability for these isn't too bad. Body parts, there are some panels being made for them, repair panels at any rate. Not so much new panels, but you certainly have to buy the repair panels now. Okay, Datsun 120Y here. These were reliable cars, very well spec'd cars back in the 1970s. They did rot away alarmingly, as did most cars back then. But find a good one of these, it's probably quite a decent steer and very rare now. How about a Ford Cortina? This is a Mark V Cortina, quite a late one, about 1981 or early 1982, but the estate car, loads of room, ideal for an antiques dealer or just a very large family. Nice little slice of 50s motoring here, this Morris Oxford 749 GVX, still on its original registration, which we approve of. But yeah, nice four-door saloon. You can easily fit 4 adults in there comfortably and potter around in that to your heart's content. Another Citroën, this time a 2CV of the mid-1960s, by which time it had the extra little rear window in the rear quarters that you can just see there behind the doors. And that makes visibility just that little bit better, which is quite an important thing if you're thinking about a car for mainly inner city use. How about this then? The original Fiat 124 was a very handy car to own, and this is a Lada based on, of course, the Fiat 124 design, and being an estate, so practical. Parts are available. I mean, I think most of them they have to ship in from distant lands, but yeah, that's quite an interesting choice. And the good old MGB GT, we've had the Roadster already, and the GT, if you just need a little bit more headroom and the practicality of that rear hatchback and the small rear seat, these have a lot going for them. Still got plenty of low emission zone cars, and here another pre-war car, one of very few to feature in this video, but the Austin 10-4, a 4-door car, slightly bigger than the Austin 7, so arguably a little bit more practical. The Austin 10 Drivers Club will help you out with parts and advice. It's a shame that this one's sort of slowly disintegrating, but yeah, find a good one of those and they're really nice things to drive. And here we have the Austin Cambridge, the Farina, this one 1965. We've had the Morris Oxford, and this is the Austin equivalent, a very smart grey example. A couple of classic Fiat 500s are next. And how about a Rover P6? The 2000 TC we've got an example of here from the late 1960s, four-door, very advanced car for its time. They drive really nicely by all accounts. Parts availability is pretty good, as is advice out there on various forums and so on. Just don't buy a rough one. The structure behind all those bolt-on panels can rust away quite alarmingly. If you're after a 1970s hatchback that's nice and easy to drive and park, maybe one of these. If you can find a non-rusty Mark I Ford Fiesta, then why not? What a good choice that'd be. Avoid the sporty ones, which are getting quite expensive now, and you could probably snap up a nice example of a Popular Plus for not too much money. An arrival of the day, here we have an R-plate Datsun. This is a Datsun 100A, two-door, quite a rare sight now, so maybe not the most practical of cars to appear in this particular collection. But again, if you buy a good one and find out who has the parts for these, again a bit of research, it certainly helps to keep these things on the road. And here, a 1966 Triumph Spitfire 4 Mark II. Really good car. If you only need a little two-seater, but you're not so keen on the boxy lines of the midgets, then go and buy a Spitfire. Great turning circle, same as a Triumph Herald, of course, on which this was based. But yeah, great little cars. How about this? A fiberglass-bodied Gilburn GT. This one from 1966. And again, a very practical car that would be. About one of these perhaps, the Austin or Morris 1800. This is an N-Reg car from 1974, big four-door saloon, 4/5-seater, loads of space, loads of storage space, decent sized boot, and of course tax exempt and ULEZ exempt, as is this, our little standard 8. Of course there had to be one of these in here somewhere. We took this photo at an evening meet we went to. This is the 8 with the 803cc engine, and they had the 10 with a 948cc engine. Four-door, all the saloons were four doors, there wasn't a two-door standard 8 or standard 10, and of course you have the companion estate which we showed before. And here we have a 1964 Vauxhall Victor FB, the four-door saloon. We had the estate earlier, which is super rare. The saloons are pretty rare, but buy a good one and that would be a really nice thing to cruise around in. How about one of these? Maybe if you don't want an MG midget, how about the Austin Healey equivalent, the Austin Healey Sprite? This is a latest one, 1967 or 1968, and in very nice condition indeed, complete with those knock-on wire wheels. Very sharp looking little car indeed. These are nice. This one spotted at the North Wales Classic Car Show in 2022. Maybe you've seen the video by now. But yeah, the Simca 1100 four-door saloon in this case, but they did also do an estate car version, which would be a nice practical vehicle, and I can certainly see myself in one of those. How about this, the Vandenplas 1300? This was Dad's old car on a K-plate, very low mileage car, so comfortable with little picnic tables in the back of the front seats, and really drive really nicely with that rack and pinion steering and transverse A-series engine. Yeah, any of the AD016 cars make for a very usable car. Not entirely usable, but if there's only one of you on most of your local inner city trips, then perhaps one of these would do. XOK 800, a 1959 scooter car. Another Triumph Herald, but this is the 1250. This was a slightly higher spec version of the Herald 1200, two-tone paints and the all-important folding sunroof on this particular model, standard on the 1250. But again, super practical car, a great turning circle, popular with driving schools, comfy inside, nice bit of wood as well. Now we spotted this in France. If you saw our French trip video towards the end of 2022, you'll have seen us have a good close look at this left-hand drive, Paris registered Citroën Visa. How about one of these perhaps? Rear engine VW, but not a Beetle. This is the VW Type 3, the squareback or estate, as anyone else would call it. The rear load bay is probably slightly compromised by the engine being under it, but these are really handsome looking cars, I think, and this slightly modified car just looks fantastic. Here we have the Saab 96 V4. We had a 95 Earlier on, the estate car version, which is really, really wild looking, and slightly more normal looking is this, the saloon version. Not quite as practical, not a huge boot, but yeah, these are actually quite a good car to drive, very comfortable seats as well. And here, this is, of course, the Peel P50, one of the smallest microcars of all time, and super economical, not entirely practical. Not much good if you're going on a shopping trip, for example, but if you just need to commute to work and back and you're not going too far, why not? Now, this is quite practical, the Singer Vogue, the estate version. You won't find too many of these for sale, and you won't find too many in this condition. But nice, comfy car again, lovely wooden dashboard, very comfortable seat, very airy cabin, great view out, nice and easy to park, and quite economical too. Much of that can be levelled at this, the Austin A60 Countryman. This is an early 1967 car leading in a lineup of classic Farinas, but the estate car is the one I would definitely try and find if I could find one. That is just such a usable car, loads of spares around for these. Next up we have a Vauxhall Viva HC based estate. You'll notice quite a few estates feature in this collection for very good reason. They are super duper practical. This is from 1973, this example. The roofline does swoop down quite a lot, so it does compromise it slightly if you're planning on carrying any wardrobes, but yeah, otherwise, great car. Another little classic Fiat here, the little Fiat 127 Coupe of the 1970s. Again, this would qualify for historic classification with DVLA, and that would make it ULEZ exempt, of course, so that's a great consideration really, especially at £12.50 a day to drive into the ULEZ zone. Now on the Isle of Wight we spotted this, a very original, I'm not quite sure if it's on the road, Ford Anglia, but yes, if you don't need a four-door saloon and you like classic Fords, you could do a lot worse than try and track down a non-rusty 105e Anglia. You might take longer to find a good one of these now, the Vauxhall Viva HB. This is a two-door saloon. Of course, you get the estates as well, which are even more practical, which is probably the one I'd try and find, but both of them are probably equally rare, so you might as well just spend the time and maybe find the estate car version. We've seen an A30 already, and this is the slightly later A35. Not a huge number of differences, but it has a slightly larger engine, 948cc, as opposed to 803, and the all-important larger rear window, which for parking purposes and manoeuvring purposes does make a difference. Mrs. OCC used to run an A30, and I remember not being able to see out of it all that well. Okay, another ADO 16 here. This is a Morris 1100 from 1964. Still quite a few cars that are low emission zone compliant. And here we've got a Rover P5, the 3-litre car. The later ones, the P5Bs, had the V8 engine, but the earlier cars had this, the 3-litre straight 6. And yeah, by all accounts, these are a very nice car indeed to drive, and somewhat overlooked because of the 3.5-litre V8 that came later. Now the BMW O2, I picked this particular photograph of a slightly dusty looking 1602 that we saw in Portugal many years ago, but there are different engine variations available of the O2 series BMWs, and one of those would be a great steer, I would have thought. Again, parts availability is pretty good. Now if you've got a large family or you regularly need to make large shopping trips, how about one of these? I wouldn't recommend the Bedford CA van, because as I've said before, vans can be a bit difficult to park, rear visibility isn't always great, and if you get one with the windows or the sliding windows, maybe a Worko bus with all the seats in the back, that would be a very practical vehicle to own. And here we have the Riley 1.5, we've seen the Wolseley 1500s, and this is a slightly sportier Riley version with twin carburetors. But yeah, really great car. This is a Welsh registered car seen at a car show over in North Wales quite a few years ago now. Here's a perfect little city car, and of course historic now, TPD 913S, a 3-door Peugeot 104. Maybe one of these, also French, would be suitable, the Renault 16. Hatchback, of course. This is a left-hand drive example, but 4 doors, nice airy cabin. I'm sure that would be a very interesting car to own and drive. There's a Renault 4 alongside it. Which would you prefer? Now, this is the two-stroke Trabant. Now, I'm not entirely sure that a two-stroke Trabant is a perfect inner-city driving car, but the late Trabant had the conventional four-stroke engine, I think out of a VW Polo or something. So that will give you the Trabant look, but just a little bit more usable, which is the one I would actually go for. Here, just a plain Jane four-door Mark I Ford Escort, a very rare sight now. So many Escorts are rally prepared and so on. Mexico's RS2000s, they survive in great numbers, but these are actually quite a rare sight now and would make a great regular user, I would have thought. Now, the Morris Marina Coupe, the TC, the twin carburettor car. That's a very distinctive looking car. You're not very likely to see another one on your daily commute if you're running one of these, but why not? Again, just look after it, service it well, preventative maintenance. There's no reason why it shouldn't be a reasonable car to drive. KHF 883, another little mini car. This is a Bond mini car of the 1950s. Not for everyone. Some of these had a kickstart where you had to lift the bonnet and actually kickstart it, just like a motorbike, which isn't entirely practical, but yeah, that could be a nice economical car to bomb around in. Or how about one of these, the Vauxhall Chevette? We had a three-door hatch earlier, but they also did saloon versions. This is a four-door saloon. They also did a two-door as well. None of them are exactly common, but again, running gear parts are probably pretty well served, I would have thought. But body panels, I think you might struggle. We've had Dolomites, but how about this? The earlier Triumph 1300, a front-wheel drive car. These are quite nicely appointed inside, very comfortable cars. You don't see too many of them around, but very usable with that 1300cc engine. It should keep up with modern traffic reasonably well. I think they were all manual gearboxes. And how about this? The 1970s Reliant Scimitar GTE, one of the SE5s. Fiberglass bodyworks and nothing to worry about there. There is a steel chassis underneath, but a nice simple V6 Ford engine under the bonnet. Paint finishes can suffer with fiberglass bodies. You can get micro blistering. Seems to be a problem on Scimitars for some reason. Okay, to Vauxhall again, 1966. And we have this. It's not a Vauxhall Victor, although it is based on it. This is the sporty VX490, based on the Victor 101. This had twin carburetors and a higher compression engine and so on. So this was a sporty, pepped-up version of the contemporary Victor. Okay, another Saab. This is on the D-plate, 1966. Saab 96. This is a two-stroke car, 841cc. I'm not entirely sure that two-stroke, like I said with the Trabant, is the ideal choice for inner-city driving, but certainly distinctive, and they make a great sound when they're given a bit of hoof. Now, this was at a classic car auction in Donington many, many years ago. An Austin A50 Cambridge. Quite a dumpy little car, but B-series engine, so fairly painless to run, I would have thought. Rounding out this collection of ULEZ, Low Emission Zone compliant classic cars, is this M-registered Datsun 140J. You won't find too many of these around, but find a good one, and by all accounts they were a nice little car to drive around in. I remember these all over the place in the 1970s, but they did disappear very, very quickly indeed. Anyway, that Datsun rounds out this look at tax-exempt, ULEZ exempt, historic classification cars that possibly would make excellent choices for driving in and around London and some other cities that bring in their own low emission zones as time goes by. Thank you very much for watching. I hope that was of interest. Please check out some of the other videos on the Old Classic Car channel, and there'll be many, many more coming along very, very soon. So bye for now.